Good afternoon and good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Coast-to-Coast EVs, your mostly fortnightly fast charge on electric vehicles and infrastructure. A little bit of an off week last week for things that happened, apparently. Wasn't too aware of them myself. And we will actually be moving forward to the next one will be in December because the next one will fall on Thanksgiving otherwise. So check out the Coast-to-Coast EVs show page for who's coming up, the dates we've got going, and hopefully we'll get fortnightly again in December, just in time for Christmas. And quick reminder, you can catch us the next day, audio on all your podcast platforms. So that's Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, all the usual places, usually up by around lunchtime the following day. So with that out of the way, welcome back, everybody. Walter Schulze of the Network Architect channel down in North Carolina, and Mr. Eric Way of the News Coolum channel over on the West Coast. So still afternoon for you. Still light where you are? Any chance?
Other than the storm clouds, yeah, yeah. No, the sun is setting. Yeah, it's getting darker.
We need some rain over here. Massachusetts is getting brush fires still. It's not.
Well, yeah, we just had some of those in Southern California, so
that's good. Yeah. Welcome to everybody. I've said hello to a few folks in the chat already, but let us know where you are, what you're up to, what you're driving, anything. Actually, where you've charged is probably the most appropriate for today's topic, which will eventually, once we get into it, be the acceleration of DC fast charging. We have probably more projects that we can possibly cover in one show, but we'll do our best and we'll get to all of the ones that you care about specifically. So definitely let us know where you've been charging or the ones that you are most excited for. But before we hop into the equipment, let's talk about the EVs. The news this week, we're looking at the Rivian and Volkswagen joint venture, which had been mooted previously, but was firmed up this week with a $5.8 million deal. And it brings together a legacy automaker, Volkswagen, who has got into EVs early with the ID4 and ID3 over in Europe, but having some problems, got layoffs over in the European factories, and software has been a perennial issue for them over the last few years, in EVs especially. So bringing Rivian to the table, EV-only automaker, obviously, with pretty good software from what I've seen. Everything that I've used in a Rivian has been pretty on point, and they seem to have their updates down. But they do need cash. So this 5.8 billion is definitely going to be, over the years that it's distributed, well worth it for them. Eric and Kitty, how are you feeling about the Rivian joint venture with Volkswagen and Germany's finest, should we say?
Yeah, I'm not surprised in the sense that they've been hinting at this partnership for a while, that sort of infusion. I think it mostly has to do with VW's Scout, right? They're bringing back the Scout and the little off-road vehicles. So I mean, in that regard, it makes sense. But yeah, I just don't know that VW benefits as much from it, as you said, as Rivian does, because Rivian is the one that's really strapped for cash. They need the money coming in. So yeah, I mean, I find it interesting. I think personally, if I were in VW's shoes, I would have rather gone on it on my own. Like, you're trying to blaze a trail by, create a trailblazer by blazing a trail that someone else has already blazed. I don't know. Yeah, I see it as an interesting partnership. Definitely beneficial. Like you said, I think maybe that is it. The software is that big hang up for them. Yeah, I don't know how this is. Yeah, and I don't know how this is going to play out though. With the other thing I think about too is they both technically have their own charging networks in a way, right? So VW, it's more extended. It's left out, and then Rivian has their adventure network, which I think, I mean, the more the merrier. But it is kind of interesting that you see those two partnering up. Yeah, I guess it makes sense, is what I'm saying, but I'm just not sure that VW sees nearly as much out of it as Rivian does. So, I mean,
It's quite slanted towards obviously VW funding it as well. There's supposed to be reportedly around 1,000 employees coming out of this endeavor.
Yeah.
They've already got a website up. 3/4 of that is being funded by VW, and only 25% by Rivian. But then, I mean, we have touched on it. The software has been a real bugbear for what is, potentially an attractive lineup. Good, in their electric vehicle range, good price points. In Europe, the Golf ID3 crossover has been popular, until it had those software bugs. The ID Buzz is kind of probably too expensive, but certainly iconic and has the potential to be that kind of US traveler. Walter, how are you seeing this kind of collaboration? Does it make sense, or just kind of scratching your head with it?
Well, as I understand, it's being based in Silicon Valley. Is that correct?
I didn't see where they were basing themselves, actually, but it would make sense from the software angle, certainly.
Correct. Yeah. So we have a European automaker who's in trouble with software integration, leaning on the tech capital of the world, Silicon Valley, in order to solve its problems, which makes sense. I mean, where else are you going to go in order to find the talent necessary in order to solve that kind of problem? If I were in their shoes, I'd be nervous also, because you have a whole line of cars that you need to get into people's hands, and they're now running on electronics, integrated electronics that are complicated, and you don't have in-house skill sets, so you have to find that somewhere. You don't want to go to Tesla, and actually Tesla probably wouldn't even help them. They wouldn't even answer the phone if they called them. So where else are you going to go? And the other option is Lucid, but they seem to be pretty hush-hush with their new investors. There is some sharing of motor technology out of Lucid, but I haven't heard anything about sharing software technology out of Lucid. So it seems to make sense. And one concern I have is that Rivian actually needs this cash. You would have thought by now they would have been forging towards profitability a little bit further along. I mean, I know that we've all had a wet blanket thrown on us as a result of the spiking interest rates and the dip in demand, the overproduction, whatever we want to call it, the flood of used cars from fleets, whatever the witch's brew that brought us to this point. But the fact that Rivian needs cash when they're churning out so many Amazon delivery vehicles, they have the Canadian Post contract for delivery vehicles up there. They have a lot of solid contracts, and they're still underwater looking for somebody to help them, is a bit concerning. So that's the one that I have about it. The benefit of the mutual benefit between the two companies, I suppose there is synergy there. And if you have the talent, by all means, monetize it in whichever way makes sense to the company. So I don't see anything wrong with that as far as Rivian participating in providing expertise with software integration to vehicles, which is something that they have world-class talent for. But again, the concern I have is that Rivian needs the cash.
Yeah, well, and I just think on that point though, Walter, like how long did it take before Tesla was finally like actually making profits, right, off their revenue? And they had access to a lot of things that really weren't present for Rivian anymore by the time Rivian started, in terms of being able to sell off excess ZEV credits, things like that. Tesla had a lot of other ways to offset their expenses. So, like the fact that Lucid and Rivian are both struggling financially doesn't really surprise me. I could see it being a long time for them to reach that level of profitability as an independent startup. So
yeah, Lucid, yes, but I would say the second most popular electric vehicle I see in this area is the Rivian delivery van by Amazon. Those things are all over the place. I mean, literally, I'm running over them on my way to and from work, and they're stopped in my neighborhood. They're all over the place. They've sold a boatload of those damn delivery vehicles, and obviously they were with small margins, but even still, there had to have been some, even if they were break even, they were turning their factory out, and there would have been some measure of value in just working out the kinks in the production line, if nothing else. and being able to fire up large production volumes as demand increased and decreased. So I guess that's really one distinction I see between Rivian and Tesla's journey, is that Rivian had this massive contract from Amazon delivery.
I think they've got to get to the next stage as well, though. I mean, the R2 and the R3, to some extent, a little bit further down the line will be crucial, right? You've got to get to that mass market product that will open up a whole new section of customers, and obviously they couldn't stretch at this point to getting the plant open in Georgia, so that's been kind of re-road mapped. But this is the piece or the funding that unlocks the Georgia plan and kind of gets them to it. So it's all interlinked, even if we think specifics of the deal are, sharing technology and software based for VW. The funding is what gives them the roadmap to get to that profitability.
Well, and I was also going to say, don't discount the importance of stock price too. And I mean, we can get into whether it's valid based on the fundamentals or not, but Rivian stock prices are very depressed, and that really limits them in terms of buying power, capitalization, borrowing money, that sort of thing. So you can only have so many, inflated EV stocks at one point in time. So,
yep, we've got a couple of good ones at the moment. Okay, well, I'm certainly hopeful it moves Rivian along. They are my long-time crush from afar. Don't stretch to $80,000 or $90,000 cars, but
and just out of curiosity, Crazy Postman is saying that he's never seen an Amazon delivery vehicle yet in person. Do you guys have those like swarming your guys' neighborhood as much as I do? Nothing.
Swarming.
Really? Wow.
I saw a lot in Seattle when I was over there, and we do have them in the outer suburbs of Boston, but I haven't seen all around us. Is not common.
Yeah, we have. I was just going to say, we have a new Amazon delivery center probably 50 to 60 miles from here. And I check every time I go by, and I never really see them. But these are rural routes, and I just don't know that Amazon's delivery vans can support a 200 to 300 mile delivery route. So,
yeah, maybe for some reason this was a targeted market for initial shipments or something. I don't know, but they are like literally all over the place over here.
I'm waiting for the day. Certainly willing to get rid of the Amazon chug of deliveries with fumes coming out the back of them at any time soon. Okay, well, wishing Rivian and VW well, no matter what happens in the next few months and months ahead. But let's go to the live chat and the comments just to say hello to folks. I've said hello to a few initially there before we started, but good evening to Steve P, who has recently picked up a 2020 Kona Ultimate with 11,000 miles in Massachusetts here, and with tax and rebates for $15K. Good price, good car. Congratulations to you. Andy Getch down in Florida with the Ford Mustang Mach-E and the Smart 4.2 in Fort Myers. Congratulations, and thanks for joining us. Big Barney signing in from Western New York. I will look into your troubles with finding the podcast right after this, and we'll see if we can fix that up for you. Thank you for joining, though. Yield Traveler Mach-E Rally in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Excellent. I'm seeing a lot of the Grabber Yellow recently on LinkedIn or Twitter, or one of the two, but looks pretty fetching. Doesn't beat the Eruption Green, in my opinion, but it's a good one. They're very striking colors. Ernst Shep, multi-V owner and an enthusiast in general from Iowa. Welcome. Thanks for joining. And Scott Goslin, good evenings. Thanks for the discussion. Thank you for joining us. Leonard over in Tulsa, driving to Dallas-Fort Worth this weekend. Any cool chargers to check out? We will have to check. We are exchanging notes even 5 minutes before we start here, so there's so many coming online as we chat. We'll have to figure it out. Crazy Postman.
There is Simon Mall in Tulsa that just opened an EA station.
Okay. I'd be on the lookout for BP Pulse as well. I don't know how quickly they're going to turn those around, but they're definitely active down in Texas, plus a bunch that are coming through NEVI, which we'll get onto in a bit here. Crazy Postman recommends Flying J at Ardmore. And welcome to the chat. Jay Dolanson, it's amazing how cats just appear out of nowhere. There's always cats in Eric's background, even when there's chargers. So look for those. First one to spot it wins no prizes. And let's see, anyone else I missed? We had a bunch of comments on the VW stuff, so thanks for those. We've got Sean GBR here, who saw the new Alpatronic 400 kilowatt chargers behind the sheets in Dixon City, PA. Yeah, Scranton was how they advertised it, but I guess it's technically Dixon City, and that's going to be pretty close to going live soon. I think they looked in the ground and ready to roll, so pretty excited about that. Brad Cook, yes, everywhere. I'm not sure what that reference to, but welcome.
I think the Amazon vans.
Okay, gotcha. Well, welcome. Thanks for joining us. Aaron says the same. Have the Amazon trucks in Wisconsin. Excellent. And Bashom also says Amazon EVs every day. So they're clearly out there.
All day, every day. That's all I see.
Nothing from Mark in the greater Toronto area, but welcome. Thanks for joining us. Jed's in New York suburbs and Manhattan. They're all over the place, but not yet in Queens. Wonder how they make decisions. Yeah, this seems kind of all over the place, doesn't it? Okay, then we've got Cecil Martin. Hello from Cary, North Carolina, in a Tesla Model Y long range. Hello, welcome. Brian Ribby over in Minnesota. Good evening. Missed the last few lives, so glad to be here tonight. Thank you for joining us. We have some action from your neck of the woods with Kwik Trip and Kwik Charge, so interested to see if you are familiar with that brand or if it'll be on your road trips. They do have NACS handles from the looks of it, so it could be something to spice up the Tesla supercharging in between those. We've got Rick from Savannah, Georgia. Thanks for joining us. Cranking through these, I'll be done in a sec here. Electrified light vehicles. Hey folks, driving my EV6 with about 40,000 miles, no real degradation for 2.5 years. Excellent. About the same in our IONNA 5 in terms of timeline, and 70 or 75,000, and don't see any myself, but I got to do the full test pretty soon.
Yeah, can I chime in on that real quick?
Yeah, of course.
I've got a 3-year owner's review getting baked right now, and I've been doing the preliminary video on it, and I've seen zero. Right now, I'm approaching 50%, and I'm not seeing any battery degradation whatsoever at all. It's really surprising me. I thought it would have been like 10%, 12% something, but so far I'm tracking right towards the EPA amount.
Awesome. Hopefully it's a good signal of effective thermal management and good BMS. We'll see how the Ioniq has held up to being thrashed to within an inch of its life for DC fast charging every few weeks. Bashom's in Buffalo, New York, not far from Big Barney, I would guess, in a 2024 Cadillac Lyric. Walter, applauds you. Thanks for joining. Tom Palmer checking in late. No worries. We're well behind on the topics, I'm sure, here. So thanks for joining us from San Diego in your 2020 Bolt EV. And I think we are pretty much through. We brought up a couple of comments from Patrick, but nothing has excited him more than Rove, the charging station in Santa Ana, California. I do have a video coming up on that, thanks to Mike Mahan, who's another regular viewer and a friend of the channel who took some footage, so hopefully be able to get something on that pretty soon. But thank you everyone for joining us. Thanks for chiming in to let us know where you are, what you're driving, and where you're charging. And one last couple here that I missed almost. Dominic from Jacksonville, Florida. Fisker Ocean 1 for now. Yeah, that's a ... for sure, but fair play to you for being the ultra early adopter and taking one for the team, I guess. Hope it works out for you. And Corey Leach from St. Michael, Minnesota. So some good Great Lakes crew here as well. Thanks everyone for joining. So today we are on the topic of, from the bust of the 2021-2022 kind of period where everybody was complaining about DC fast charging reliability, at least away from Tesla Superchargers, to the boom of the last 12 to 18 months. It's hard to argue when we're kind of frequently exchanging pictures here and everybody's spotting new chargers going in the ground regardless of their area or region. It's just a flurry of activity across more players than we can shake a stick at, really. So we wanted to kind of set the tone for where we've been and the context for kind of how we got to where we are today, and then go around our respective kind of projects that we track, which Walter's famous for, not just tracking them, but handing them over to other folks and creating a posse of folks that are nationwide, letting him know how things are going. And I've got my own kind of regional stuff here with the Evolve New York network, some of the NEVI tracking being pretty active in the Northeast and Midwest here. And Eric, obviously, over on the West Coast, hotbed of EV activity and all kinds of new players jumping in. So we figured it was about time as we hit the end of the year here to see what we've got going on, try and get as much of a handle on most of these projects as we can, and let you know what we're excited about for the new year. So I guess, Walter, you have probably the most eyes on the most projects. Can you give us just a brief potted history of how this kind of began, how you began tracking these, and what you've seen as you've tracked them over the last year, or just kind of a little bit beyond the year, right?
Glad to, yeah, and it's very simple. We purchased a Cadillac Lyriq that came with 2 years of free EVgo charging. There weren't a lot of EVgo stations, so I started to look for EVgo stations. And somewhere along the way, I heard that Pilot Corp was going to be installing some stations, and then I stumbled on some that had these really nice canopies, and all of a sudden, they opened 8 of them all in one day, a little bit over a year ago, and now we're up to 84 stations open. And so as a personal interest of trying to find these things and uncover where they are, making YouTube videos is just kind of like a after effect. When I'm doing my research, I have the research already, and then I just put it into a slide deck and make a video. So that's really the length and breadth of the motivation of what brought me to this place as far as tracking. And you were kind enough to have Brandon on this podcast. Afterwards, we exchanged some emails, and he let me know about the alternative fuels data center database, which I sucked down into a file, threw it into a database, and started doing what I do, which is nerd out on data. And similar, I was just looking for new things. I figured this is a good way of doing it. It's not perfect, but at least we could do what we can. And similarly, making videos, and it turned into a very similar vein of just trying to uncover things that are new in my neck of the woods, and then sharing with everyone else what I'm finding.
Yeah, and I think actually probably now that I'm thinking about it, between you and Eric, you have the, when you started doing that is roughly around the time this really started getting interesting. I think that was when NEVI had started to make award announcements, at least, so we had some sense of what charging maps were looking like. We had some of the new players with the Mercedes-Benz high power charging starting up. We'd mooted IONNA. We had crickets at that point, but certainly they were in the mix. That was the cusp of it all, kind of the boom starting off. But Eric, if we go back before that, your travels kind of, the early stuff on the channel hint at what it was like a bit beforehand, right? I mean, we had basically for public charging, Tesla wasn't open at this point. We had EVgo in cities, metro areas, and Electrify America as the only game in town for travel. How was that kind of give us context for that little, what it was like before in the old days?
That's like the second age of Middle Earth. We could go back all the way to the first age. I think it's kind of interesting because, if you were traveling in a non-Tesla 4 to 5 years ago, it was just those first initial Electrify America build outs, along with a smattering of ChargePoint, EVgo, maybe Blink, maybe some local networks, but very few and far between. And I say networks, and it really is a lot of times it was one-off stations, right? You had people who were installing a charger just because they could. Most of the time that was only like a 24 kilowatt or whatever. But things have progressed to the point where, I mean, you even look at PlugShare right now, and you go by a filter of the different networks, and there's just dozens and dozens and dozens of unique networks that are all popping up. And then, and I don't know if I commented on your video or not, Walter, but when you were doing one of your roundups for the alternative fuels data center, you had a Circle K charger that looked weird to me, and I looked it up, and it was a ChargeNet charger. So they're on their own. They're not actually, it was some error in that database, but ChargeNet is another one of these new players, doesn't have their network tied to anyone else. And they've just built like their, I think, third or fourth, that was the one in Santa Rosa that that came online. And so, yeah, you're starting to see that an electric era is probably the one that I think I'm most excited about now, because not only are they building chargers along travel routes, they're building the chargers in large enough numbers that they actually make an impact. And again, though, it's just sort of this unique network that's not really tied to any of these major players. And I would actually say that the irony in California, given that it's the highest EV population really in the country, is the bigger networks aren't actually expanding here as quickly as they are elsewhere. So it's like, if you see these build outs from IONNA, from Mercedes, even from Electrify America, and for the most part, even EVgo, right, when it comes to their travel chargers, California seems to be like last on their list. And I don't know if it's because they perceive it as an already saturated market or already sufficient chargers and they're wanting to go elsewhere, but it's those bigger networks that aren't actually making an impact in California as much right now. I would say the one exception to that is EVgo, and that's their non-extend. That's the one that they're doing. That's the GM Energy metro region chargers, and they're building those out like gangbusters. There's literally like 100 or 150 of those 350 kilowatt charging sites in California now, just within the greater state. And most of them are in the Bay Area or Southern California. So, but yeah, like I said, I think electric era is probably the one I'm most excited about. I mean, you're getting to the point where outside of some rural highway routes, if you can't travel in a CCS EV with 200 miles of range with reasonable ease, I don't know. Like it's very rare that you're even going to find a route where that's going to be a struggle anymore. So,
yeah, kind of switches I mean, we'd already kind of retired the term range anxiety if you're into the nerdy circles. I think most people have done away with that. But even the charger anxiety piece now starts to potentially slip away because we'll talk about reliability in a little bit, but you're going to gravitate to the one that works, right? So even if there is a janky old EVgo or Electrify America that has not been renovated yet, as I found when I crossed the country, and as Walter's found when he looks at these locations that a new PFJ or whatever the network we're talking about, they're quite often near to an Electrify America. So it's redundancy as well as extra numbers and extra stalls in the ground. So, and kind of to link EVgo to the Pilot Flying J project, which is kind of the reason you can travel across the country on EVgo, right? I mean, we've talked about how they were mostly metropolitan area focused. You could always see quite a big presence from EVgo, but then when you looked at their map, it was heavily clustered around metro areas, cities, and you couldn't really travel across the country on them. Walter's potentially on the cusp of doing that now, because of these Pilot Flying J, which is is perfect for travel, is located right by the interstate, and that is on the EVgo Extend program. So Walter, give us a little update on where they are. And I mean, it's hard to tell because they activate one every day, it seems now, but give us roughly where we are, and we'll try and put a pin in it for the moment at least.
Certainly, as you say, we are intending to go cross country on Interstate 40 with the one station I needed in order to complete that has now opened, which is West Memphis, Arkansas. Unfortunately, the hurricane that took out Interstate 40 in Western North Carolina is going to disrupt our route sticking to I-40 specifically. That was definitely heartbreaking to have to watch. But so anyway, we'll amend our course a little bit. The Pilot Flying J thing has really started to become impressive because how do I say this? The goal of having the ability to cross the country without having to look for chargers and have a gas station like experience. I've been continually going through Eric's historical videos. I've got a long playlist that I listen to when opportunity presents, and his approach to doing EV road trips typically is not with planning. He just gets on the road and starts to drive, and when he sees a place that meets whatever need he has at the time, whether it's eating or stopping for the night or going to some event. He'll start to look for chargers in that area and kind of impromptu look for chargers. Getting to that stage in the rest of the country has kind of been a long-standing goal for non-Tesla owners. And with interstate, if you're sticking to an interstate, Pilot Flying J is getting pretty close to the point of being able to fill that gap with a really compelling offering where not only is it immediately off the interstate, but oftentimes, as you can see, they've got canopies and restroom facilities, eateries, snack options, well lit. They're secure locations because they're always open. Just many check boxes get checked when you stop at a Pilot Flying J station. So having them in the mix for DC fast charger builds is a advantage to EV drivers. And obviously they're trying to find a way of continuing to be relevant as we continue to transition. And make no mistake, we are transitioning. I recently saw a video of Bergen, Norway, and that's what it looks like on the other side of the rainbow. when you get to the point where you flashed over, and I think there's somewhere around 50% of electric vehicles actually on the road, and their uptick rate is 96% of new cars is electric. The gas stations are all being converted over to electric vehicle charging stations. They're ripping out gas pumps. And so that's really where this story is going. And so as a C-store operator, you have to remain relevant. So they have an opportunity to partner with General Motors to help fund the transition that is necessary in order to stay relevant. So it's a win-win situation. Actually, it's win-win-win. GM wins, Pilot wins, and we as EV drivers win. And it's really been a pleasure to go and experience charging at their locations. So right now, as you say, they are on an opening spree. It seems as though as they're pushing into the end of the year, and I don't know if it was a coincidence, but it was immediately after the election. They started to open like it was going out of style, exactly like that. Not one per day, not two per day, like 4 per day. And they're still on a pretty good clip. They stopped for the weekend, and I thought they were like it was a burst and they were going to stop, but they haven't stopped. They're still opening stations, and I know of a lot more stations that are energized, just waiting for commissioning. So that's where it currently stands.
That's awesome. And I think the kind of milestone or benchmark we were looking at was 100, right? 100 stations before the end of the year, hopefully.
Well, it was supposed to be 200, but they're not going to make that.
Right,
I think they just
all kind of reset, reset expectations. I think we knew earlier in the year from your projections that wasn't happening, but 100 would mark good progress at this point, no?
Yeah, there were certain practicalities with utility delivery that they were just running into the practicality of it. And if they hit 100, I would say that would be success, in my personal opinion.
Awesome. And they kind of kickstarted it. I mean, this was as we say, the one you started back in September of 2023. There are others here starting to move on, and that vision of Norway and having chargers right next to the gas pumps, but eventually the gas pumps being replaced. IONNA, although we had, picked them initially as kind of dedicated charging locations, we're seeing now that they have a lot more partnerships, although some are being built in the Apex. Rechargery is going to be its own thing. It looks like the Houston Rechargery will be its own contained kind of lounge or something like that. But they're also partnering with Sheets pretty heavily. We referenced it in the intro there with Dixon City up in Scranton. Those are in the ground now. We had another announcement for, let me remember, Willoughby in Ohio, which is kind of northeast Ohio, not far again from an Electrify America, which is going to be a better option then. And then we have the partnership with Sheets starting to come in. That pairs it with a convenience store that's very popular through the Midwest here. Is going to be highly visible, and those are already in the ground, right? I think we can go to look at some of these now. This is from the Apex site, but we get an idea of what's happening on the ground there with the power cabinets in the foreground there, the dispensers in the background. We're still early days, but it's coming together.
And I don't know if it was fortuitous or not, but we had someone from IONNA chime into a post I did on LinkedIn. His name was Riccardo Stantamini, the chief product officer of IONNA, and it had to do with the Scranton, Pennsylvania location. And he mentioned that they were still going to be adding canopies to it. So it wasn't, I said it looked done. And he said, no, we're going to be adding canopies to it. So canopies are definitely a thing in IONNA's playbook. So again, trying to perform a higher driver focused experience for EV drivers. So.
And I mean, even though we've been talking about them for more than a year, so it does feel like saying they're fast moving would be, a stretch in that sense. They have, since they kind of came out of stealth mode, over the summer and said, right now we got Toyota on board. They kind of shed all their cladding of trying to keep secrets and then moved straight into these are the locations they've started to announce. Not all of them necessarily. I think we've got 10 on the board that we know about through planning and permits, but they've only really announced 4. But still, they're starting to move out, right? And these are all the ones that they're announcing are all saying by the end of 2024, which here is now 6-7 weeks away.
Yeah, they've announced 4, but we know of one additional one also in Ohio. So there's 5 known sites that are visible on PlugShare, which must mean there's additional sleeper sites that are at similar levels of completion. Plus, as you say, there's the permits that we've been spotting as well. So there's 11 in total. And how many more are out there that we don't know about is anyone's guess. Just from the trajectory that I'm seeing, I get the sense that there's many more out there and perhaps 20, 25 before the end of the year. I don't really know. And again, it would have to depend on utilities being delivered.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know who's supplying all the transformers, but whoever they are, that was already stretched. Whatever they're getting orders for now is... I imagine very, very heavily working like Santa's workshop at the moment.
You want how many?
Yeah. Sorry, what? So, I mean, this kind of brings us on to equipment as well. I don't want to get too far into it because we've talked a lot about this and I want to jump to the comments here in a second. But we are starting to see with the IONNA sites, they said they would come right out of the gates with NEX J3400 on the dispensers. We're starting to see that at Kwik Charge, which we'll get onto in a little bit here with Kwik Trip's brand. And then the BP Pulse sites that we mentioned in the last stream, I'm seeing more and more permitting coming up for those. New one in Sterling, Virginia today, I think, was found with that kind of 8 Supercharger and then 2 Alpatronic dispensers. I mean, those won't have NEX. Presumably, you'll probably want to put CCS on them, given the J3400 plugs on the Superchargers already. But you're starting to see these more hybrid sites. So whenever before was talking about why is CCS only, sites going into the ground? Why is J3400 not really starting to progress? We're starting to see those early design sites that probably, have been in the works all year, but they're starting to come to fruition. They're starting to get the hardware, the dispensers, the connectors, and the cabling that is going to make these sites a reality. So Eric, how obviously the Tesla piece is kind of always there in the background. We're starting to get more models running through to some of them will start to be shipping with adapters. Some of them will start to have the native port. How are you seeing all this play out as a kind of, it's an important transition, but it's also quite awkward to get that balance right?
Well, and I noticed I saw Brad in the comments too mentioning that he also saw one of those charge point chargers with the, I don't know if it was the Omniport or like the site that I visited where they were switching out a lot of the CHAdeMO cables for the NACS or J3400 cables. I've always seen it as much ado about nothing, because if you get past all of the pomp and circumstance and all of the, regale us with tales of the superior Tesla plug, it's the same standard behind it. It's still they're using the same protocol. There's the same number of, you have a positive pin and you have a negative pin, right? You have the same communication protocols. So I see it as much ado about nothing. Get the chargers in the ground, and then you can start changing the cables out as you need, right? Or you can allow the use of adapters. So I agree with you. I think a lot of what we're seeing is just, these are older sites that were already designed. They already had the parts allocated. This site that we'll probably talk about in a bit, that's 4 CCS1 cables. But if you look in the background, they're all the Tesla level 2s, right? I think they might have 2 Clipper Creek J1772 or 177. Yeah. Anyway, I'm blanking out on all these. All these numbers are confusing me now. I'm old. My bones hurt. But yeah. So I don't see the standard the cable head being an issue. The manufacturers haven't started releasing, other than Tesla, haven't started releasing those yet to the public. Already native in the car, and then so that's not an issue. The adapters we know work. Some of them are being recalled, but for the most part they work, and it's the same standard. So just get the chargers in the ground, and if you need to use an adapter, you can use an adapter. So
you neatly touched on the your background there, which has a very pleasant sunset, but also I think it's mainly for the equipment. So tell us about that site. I'll play the video here, and you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah. It's so something funny happened on the way to the ballot box. So as I was dropping off on election day, as I was dropping off my ballot box, I noticed these DC fast chargers outside of the casino, the Colusa casino in Northern California. Wasn't on PlugShare, wasn't updated. These are 280 kilowatt split power units. There are 4 CCS1 cables. And, it just like caught me by surprise. And it was a comment I was going to make earlier for you, Walter, too, is I know you've mentioned it a number of times on your videos, is these sleeper sites that are going in and we don't know. And so that one in particular is one that I'm going to try to see if I can get some sort of an interview maybe, or talk to the people involved, because it looks like they might be trying to position themselves to provide DC fast charging installation and support specifically for Indian casinos and reservations, which would be a very interesting angle to take. It just kind of surprised me when I saw it. And after I dropped off my ballot, I turned around and stopped by really quick and just wanted to see. But it's one of those surprises that's not really a surprise. It's a place that I've been wondering why they haven't had a DC fast charger there for a while now, considering how many solar panels they are and just how EV friendly they've been, right? So it's a pretty interesting. When I was there, actually, a Tesla Y owner had pulled in, and he was going to plug into the AC chargers in the background behind my car. And he asked about the speed, and I said, well, these other ones are 180 kilowatt. I didn't get to see. I was kind of in a rush, so I didn't get to see if he was actually able to plug in and get it to work yet. But that's my next mission, is to actually go there and charge and see if I can and talk to someone about the site. So
it happens all over. Obviously, Walter catches the sleeper sites, from folks sending them in or just through his sweeps. But I had one. My family had Monday off school for Remembrance Day. I didn't go, but they had a bowling trip, and when they came back, I accidentally brought up PlugShare instead of Google Maps to see where they'd been. And I noticed there's a sort of charging station in there called Electric Fish or something. It's supposed to be I'm gonna have to pop down there and take a look, but it's this literally 5-10 minutes from my house, and just a brand new vendor. I pass through that area quite often, just hadn't seen it at all, but it's a new pip on PlugShare that is just starting to pop up all around the greater Boston area. So these are coming all the time. This is in addition to the projects we're going to try and cover here, all of the networks that are expanding with intent. A lot of these are, in some cases, dealerships, municipalities, businesses, independent businesses, just trying to throw these things in. So it's kind of all hands to the pump, and this is where this is coming from.
Yeah, and we are treading ground already trod by Norwegians. I remember multiple years ago, Kyle Connor was in Norway doing a road trip, and he was saying in Norway they don't add pips to PlugShare anymore because that's not a thing that they find necessary. And I think at some point, as you say, just the ferocity of local businesses, like the chargers behind Eric, if I was a casino owner, that is a terrific investment, because I'm getting people to stop. And then while they're stopped, they're looking at my casino and then they're thinking, well, maybe I'll just go in. And that's exactly what you want. You want someone to come into your casino. So the ferocity of local business owners using electric vehicle charging in order to attract customers to their property just has this, nuclear weapon effect on the number of chargers that get put in simultaneously, and after which is just game over.
And the speed is right too. You're going to have a lot of people who are complaining about who's going to install a 180 kilowatt split power charger in this economy. But I mean, if you're a casino you want people, you want people in there for an hour or 2 hours if possible, maybe even more than that. The longer a person is there at your location, the more money that they're generating for that casino. So a 180 kilowatt charger is probably the perfect power, so I think like you said, the businesses are going to start latching on to this and realizing how much of an impact it's having. So
let me jump to the comments. We've got some talk of different networks and providers, so I want to make sure we get as many as we can in. Crazy Postman, hello. Circle K, who we'll come on to as well, purchased Hutchinson Oil Company, which operates like 20 or 25 convenience stores out in western Oklahoma. Hope we get fast charge out of there. Yeah, they haven't expanded too far into that part of the country, but definitely on the list of the multi-region now. They've been up to Pacific Northwest. I know they've got some in Los Angeles area, certainly in Walters area. Northeast hasn't had so many, but I did notice a bunch going through Indiana and Illinois, so they've kind of picked their places. And I know also, we should talk about Canada a little bit. They're certainly up in Quebec and kind of that area where they're headquartered. So Circle K is one of them that's worth watching, but also they have the most affordable, reliably affordable DC fast charging. It's always below 50 cents per kilowatt hour. I think the average is closer to 45, 46. And a lot of them are down at 43 cents per kilowatt hour, which maybe a couple of years ago would have been mid-price, but now that's an absolute steal because I think we're closer to 50, 55 cents per kilowatt hour on your average pricing. So fair play to Circle K for getting those and keeping them at a reasonable price.
Yeah, terrific research on that, Steve. I saw that post on LinkedIn. It was very interesting to read.
So maybe we can also talk about some disappointments. Do I have the ability to share screen here for a second, Steve?
Yeah, of course.
Let's see. Oh, present. Yeah.
I think you might have to add it to stage.
Yeah. I think it's asking me to. There you go. It's a little bit different than the Zoom. You can see it now. So, can you see it now?
Yep, got it.
Yeah. Okay. So this is Bernie, California. Is a nice. It's a really nice town. A slightly different casino. A slightly different implementation. So EV Gateway has been one of the bigger disappointments, I think, in Northern California, at least in the terms of the ones that I've tried to use. I went to a different 4-stall location, and I was able to get one of the chargers working, which apparently I found out later was a minor miracle. But yeah, this is what we've been used to. And if you read the comments, right, this is stuff that's dead and abandoned. No one's ever powered it up. It was a possibility of being a really great station up here at Pitt River Casino in Bernie, and then that's what we ended up with. So
it's for adventure vehicles. At least it's landscaped. I've seen some that are overgrown, so at least they landscape around the chargers to make them look like.
It's a nice picnic location if you
it's a
go with the family.
Modern sculpture art. We traveled from California to northern Minnesota. Blazer EV Lake 123, hello, and hoping to try the second quick charge station in Ashland, Wisconsin, as soon as that opens, which should be any day now. Which does bring us to, thank you for raising that, the activation of the first quick charge by Kwik Trip location. Walter sent this to me hot off plug share just before we started here, so it has been energized tonight. Kwik Trip is a very popular convenience store chain in the Great Lakes area, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and I'm sure a bunch of other states around that area. According to USA Today, the best C-store chain going. And this is their kind of first effort. So you can see they've gone with canopies, no pull through, but certainly fairly large spaces. So maybe you could finagle a trailer with one of these, all your mod cons with definitely garbage cans back there. I'm sure there are squeegees.
Yeah, and can we talk about the exceedingly large water bottle that they put in for everyone to have some water from?
Yeah.
Look at how big that thing is.
I thought that was a Snapple.
Yeah, I can see that. I'm assuming that's a branded garbage can. I can see the squeegees strapped to the side now. But these do have J3400, so that's, to Eric's point, still being, just a much ado about nothing, but certainly you're starting to see them for the folks who are clamoring for a mix of the two main standards that are still there. Quick Charge itself only really announced that it was going to start these constructions last month, start of October, although they had been on the Wisconsin NEVI Awards, which is another thing we'll hopefully get to here in a little bit. But that marks quite an important milestone because there's at least, I think it's 15 to 20 sites around Wisconsin. Some of these are very, very remote. I think West Salem is fairly accessible and is not NEVI funded, but one up in it may be the Ashland site actually. Is NEVI funded, and that's way on the whatever the one that is up on the banks of the lake there is going to be very, very useful to travelers in that area from what I remember. But that's a big one, right, Walter? It feels important to get them on the board.
Yeah, the important thing I think about Kwik Trip is not only that they're receiving government funds from the NEVI program, but there was indication in their press release is that there's really nothing stopping them from adding them elsewhere where they did not receive NEVI awards. They've got means, motive, and opportunity, and all they need to see is a spreadsheet where the numbers go from red to black. And then after that, they're going to be adding them in multiple different places. I mean, these are business people who are trying to operate a business, and it all boils down to whether or not, if you put a DC fast charger in a convenience store parking lot, if you make more sales or not. And I think we'll all agree the answer is yes. And then there's just a question of ROI. How long do you have to operate those things in order to see a return on investment? And as long as that lines up, anyone will fund that. You can find any bank in the country in order to write you a check in order to put those things in.
So just one more point though, Steve, on that J3400 plugs. Do we have a running population of how many Teslas currently support the CCS standard? Because to me, that's really the main justification for when you should switch. Because if a majority of Teslas on the road still don't have native CCS language, then what's the point of a J3400 plug, right? Like, that is one thing to consider too, and that might be the biggest reason we're seeing a delay. So
I'm thinking, I mean, it was only the early model years of Model 3, right? And then Model Y is the biggest seller, and that came out post 2020, so they all would have shipped with the J3400.
So all Ys are compatible?
I don't 100%, but I'm almost certain that would be.
Yeah, and if that's the case, then I think the numbers are already there to justify it. So, yeah.
No, it's just interesting to see it start coming through when people have moaned a lot about some of the original plans that were probably a year or two in the making already. They're just filtering through to and being energized now. So that's why you're seeing still CHAdeMO handles on installs, that kind of thing. But it is just part of that lag between planning and actually implementing. Let's see. We did want Brad Cook mentioned Walter for an honorable mention of FPL Evolution, and we did have a comment from Dominic Stinson on FPL Evolution has opened at least 2 stations now with ABB Terra 184s, but next CCS instead of CHAdeMO CCS. 300 amp cables, app activation, but cool to see next support 30 cents per kilowatt hour. Worth noting that because that's also the price of the quick charge right at the launch, so that would put them as one of the cheapest providers along with FPL Evolution here. But Walter, that's your neck of the woods. Quick word on FPL?
They are incredibly aggressive, and I thought Duke Energy was, but until I started to look at FPL Evolution, and they actually have an opportunity because in the state of Florida, as we've heard, EV DC fast chargers are getting stifled through government red tape, bureaucracy, whatever you want to call it. And so the public funds available are lacking. So FPL, as a utility operator in the area, can do a land grab, and that feels like what they're doing. The number of stations that, if you pull up Florida and look at the coming soon PIPs, you'll see probably about 60% of those PIPs are FPL Evolution, not to mention the ones that are already in the ground and operational. And they're nice stations. They don't put in, typically Duke Energy will put in 2 dispensers that will have a CCS1 and a CHAdeMO handle on them. FPL Evolution typically goes big with the smallest sites being 4 dispensers. So I'm very impressed with what they're doing in the state of Florida. And I think, as I said, it's a unique opportunity, and they're in the process of doing a quick land grab, trying to be the preeminent CPO in the state.
Well, it's worth noting, as Florida is a laggard on the NEVI side of things, that folks like FPL are kind of making it a bit of a non-issue. I think there's certainly a high EV adoption and population there, so they're going to need those chargers a lot like California has. But the fact that they're not spending those funds and they're showing more of a kind of disdain for expanding infrastructure at the state government level,
I just don't understand that. I mean, I really don't get the reason for it. There's free money. Someone's handing you a bag of cash and you say, no, thank you. I really.
So I mean, I don't have it all down here, but they created a specific website saying, infrastructure shouldn't be a partisan issue. So, but, when we start to talk about it, gets me onto NEVI a little bit because, some folks had asked, and Eric brought up the point that, with the change of administration here, whatever side of the fence you're on, we want to see EV infrastructure progress. And does that start to really hamper the rollout of these funds? And the most likely answer, at least for the EV infrastructure side and the NEVI program, is I don't think it's going to here. A lot of the money that's gone out the door already is in states' hands. So when we look at the likes of Florida, Wyoming, West Virginia have been perennial kind of laggards on the reports that I do every month. But they really are they're isolated now. When you start to look at the states that have progressed, even, the likes of North Dakota, the ones that are really starting to move forward with their awards, they want to spend that money. They've got people who've already put in the work. They've made the maps. They've done the plans. A lot of this work has gone on under the surface over the last 2 to 3 years. And that money started for financial year 22, and then 23, 24 have gone out, 25 is about to go out. So even before all the potential to start tying this up, it really only can happen at the state level for the majority of these funds. And Ohio is a good example of this. I'll just bring this up a sec. We know Ohio has been the leader in terms of deploying NEVI funds, the first state to break ground, first state to get one energized almost this time last year. And for their progress, you can see how much of this has already happened. If we go all the way down to kind of where we are now, the end of 2024, the vast majority of this has been, they're closing their second to be round of awards this week. So this number down here, the 32.6 million that's already been spent, which is roughly a quarter of their total, that's going to go up to close to 50% that's been out the door. They've got 9 stations already energized, a bunch more, 23 odd in the planning stage, and those 10 that are under construction are going to go live, probably majority of them before the end of the year, because they are the pilot flying J's that Walter's been tracking. So you're really getting a lot of those funds already committed. So that's why I don't really have a big issue with the potential to tie these funds up. I mean, there will be states, like we say, that kind of just slow walk it and maybe don't deploy them, but in most cases those are going to be coming back and then going out to other states. So it's really, this money is out there, it's funding private infrastructure or private projects like Pilot Flying J, like Loves, like the Quick Trips in these some of these locations that we're talking about. So they're overlapping with things that were happening anyway, right? So it's just helping them, and you're going to get a lot of pushback from the Ohio kind of, leaders, the people who've really worked hard to make this happen, from the private entities that are using these funds to kind of bridge some of these gaps. And it's just, I think it's so far along now from what I can see that the vast majority of the stuff that this was trying to achieve, this program, is going to be achieved, at least in a travel sense.
And this is why, too, that I had said that I think that in some ways NEVI could have short-term slowed down the build-out of infrastructure, because one of those reasons I think we aren't seeing 200 pilot Flying J locations by the end of the year is, hey, these things qualify for NEVI funding, so let's slow down a bit and see if we can get this. But that, to your point, Steve, that money was there already, right? IONNA was going to be built regardless of NEVI. The Mercedes network was going to be built regardless of NEVI. Same with Pilot Flying J. So I think this is almost more an opportunity for the people that were already building. Like, we're seeing how much Tesla is gobbling up of the NEVI funds, right? They were going to be building chargers regardless of NEVI. So this is just a way of, and I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing. There's no judgment here. I think this is a way of maybe incentivizing some of the networks that were already building. So,
I think you can see two ends of it. I mean, to Big Barney's point here, NEVI sites are too costly to ever make a profit. They're mixing into sites that are going to have to make a profit anyway, so I don't necessarily see that as the problem. But to that point, one in Hawaii that just got energized was something like a $2.5 million contribution from the NEVI funds. It's still got CHAdeMO handles, so it's a mixed CCS CHAdeMO. It's tritium hardware, which is questionable given that, where we know they are. Although they look to have been rescued, but certainly not necessarily the best provider you would want to go with. That side of it, aside from it being in Hawaii, which is always going to be expensive, is potentially an issue. On the other end, you have the Snowville, Utah site, the Pilot Flying J, which got started to be under construction this week. And that's going to bridge a huge gap. I went through there. This is a place where, every exit says no services, no gas stations, no restrooms, no nothing. You get a bush, that's it. And this Pilot Flying J is going to bridge the gap between those kind of Idaho towns and the Salt Lake City area. I don't know that they would have prioritized this one if it didn't have NEVI funding. It's round one of Utah's NEVI funds. I don't know that would have been a big, maybe Walter can speak to this more because he sees the full map and where they're coming online. But it seems like a place I wouldn't have prioritized other than it's got federal funding and that state moved quickly.
Yeah, I can say that I've been watching this project now for the better part of a year, if not a little bit more. I don't know exactly. And it's very clear, for instance, case in point, the state of North Carolina, there was one build and multiple sites that had PIPs associated with them, but there was no indication of construction. North Carolina announced their round one NEVI. Weeks later, Pilot Flying J was out there constructing, and they didn't win all but two NEVI awards. And the two sites that received NEVI awards are not under construction. Those have to go through a bureaucratic process before they could actually be built. It's all the other sites that were on their build list. They were just sitting there waiting to see what the decision was. And as soon as the decision's made, they had crews out there like within weeks afterwards, turning dirt, digging things up, and putting in canopies.
And so I have two thoughts on this. One is, to your point, Steve, that was a criticism that CARB had for Electrify America, where they basically called them to the floor and said, look, you have $1 billion in California. Your role was to build chargers in areas where no one else was going to be building chargers. And Electrify America failed at that in California. They still prioritized the high volume locations that other CPOs were building chargers there anyway. And it's why we still have a 350 mile stretch of highway that has no public DC fast charging. It's just 2 Tesla Superchargers. So if you happen to have that access, you're okay. But if you don't, then you just can't take that route. And that was something that Electrify America should have covered, and they didn't. But the ROI thing too, I think we should at least address the elephant in the room. These NEVI funded sites, these aren't more expensive than the Tesla Superchargers, right? Like there's a lot of built-in costs that go with the NEVI that come with operational costs and things like that are downstream costs that they're covering. But if you look at the actual cost per unit and per power, that EVgo site behind Walter, that's 2 350 kilowatt chargers, right? That's the equivalent of what is it, like an 8-stall supercharger, V3 supercharger in terms of actual power. If you break it up in terms of the actual cost, it's not 80% different, right? It's maybe Tesla might have a price advantage, but you're looking at maybe 20% cheaper, maybe 15% at most. I think the bigger issue with ROI on NEVI sites is the size. You can't have 4 stalls and expect to get enough traffic there to recoup the cost of installing a NEVI site. It probably does need to be double that. And at that point, you can get high enough usage that it will offset the installation cost. So there is an ROI issue, but the difference in cost between the NEVI sites that are non-Tesla versus the NEVI sites that are Tesla just isn't that significant.
And I would also like to point out that the government does have some self-serving interest in this, and we might argue that this is politics trying to focus on the environment and get people to be forced into EV. And I don't think that's it. I really don't. I think the federal government of the United States has a self-serving interest to encourage people to drive electric vehicles because it frees them from foreign petroleum. And the more people who drive EVs, the less foreign petroleum is being consumed in the open market. And it makes the economics to run the country improved. And so although they're spending, $5 billion to seed electric vehicle chargers, think of the reversal of cash flowing out of the United States that could stay domestically. And that would dwarf $5 billion in a heartbeat, man. The way the federal government spends money, it's like pocket change, nothing. We would reverse that in the space of seconds.
It might actually be the opposite, Walter, of self-serving. It might be self-sacrifice, because we know how much money gets fed in by lobbyists representing oil industries. There is no excess money from the electric vehicle cabal, right? There's no money from like these battery. There's nothing left to pay, and lobby politicians to support this. So if anything, this is a bit of self-sacrifice, but I think there is at least some recognition that it's a change that needs to happen, because like you said, there is zero pathway to energy independence for the United States if we don't transition away from fossil fuel vehicles. There's just zero pathway for it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
I want to take a look at some of the comments here, and we can pick out a common thread between some of these. An update from Big Barney on one of the Love's travel centers in New York on I-90. Only 4 ports, but that's a Love's travel center. They've been getting NEVI funds. I think they were possibly the 3rd in line for awards, maybe 2nd in line for the amount. So there's that. Where's the other one I was looking for? Don't know if it's on here, but Old Traveler had mentioned Shell Recharge was one he was going to watch long term. So Love's, Shell Recharge. Who else have we got? Leonard had mentioned Circle K.
And you mentioned BP Pulse. I'm starting to see a lot of pips on PlugShare for them at TA centers, right?
Yeah. Travel Centers of America initially, but certainly BP Pulse is in there as well with some pretty aggressive plans. So this is big oil, right? I mean, this is, these, I've seen the lobbying sessions that they have been putting some of the commissions they've been to, and the executive from Loves was saying we need the government assistance. It's not quite there yet. To Eric's point, the ROI isn't exactly there, but we need these initial catalysts to make it worthwhile. Get the experience, get these things in the ground. And we're not an oil company. We're a refueling company. Whatever's on the road, we're going to refuel that. We're going to recharge that, and then we're going to recharge the humans, to IONNA's branding of recharge for your car and recharge for the person. So this isn't, this isn't a partisan thing. It's just the way technology is going, and the technology is going to be there one way or another. We see Europe doing it, obviously. Asia's doing it. China leading a lot of that. And you can't ignore this. It's going to be out there. It's just how long you can kind of keep it at bay. So we're really not, in the mandate part of it and the all EVs part of it is really just a technology shift that you decide whether or not the US is going to lead or follow or be dragged kicking and screaming. With charging being a key part of that, we need the infrastructure there to be able to make it happen. So if it's going to get private-public partnerships to start that, then I don't see that being a bad thing personally. Let me see. We have so many potential. Let's see. Old Traveler, both BP and Shell have had large non-petrol energy divisions for well over a decade. Exactly. These are the companies branding themselves as energy now instead of liquid fuel. It's just a different way to make those vehicles get back on the road. Did anyone see any comments that I need to call out as we?
Yeah, I think the affable alpaca. He was asking. They were asking. I don't know if that's the one that I had mentioned that was lacking coverage, or if they're talking about behind me. So the Colusa casino that's behind me is on Highway 45, but the one that has no coverage is Highway 395 north of Reno. So it's basically that 300-mile stretch that connects from Interstate 80 up into eastern Oregon.
Okay, thank you. And I think this one will be for you as well, Eric. Jed, disagreeing on the costs of the Tesla Supercharger and the differences between other providers not being substantial. Look at the latest Tesla post about prefab units dropping costs 25% over prior installs.
Well, and I mean, prefab, you're welcome, alpaca. Well, I mean, the prefab we know cuts costs, but I mean, that was the same thing that EVgo is now doing prefab for their build outs as well. And then Electric Era that I had mentioned as well, the reason they got that contract with Costco is they had a 7-week turnaround time from signing the paper, thank you, Walter, to actually powering up the chargers is 7 weeks, right? So we're looking at these fast prefab, drop them in the ground, and they're good. And I mean, maybe Tesla has been able to cut their costs additionally, but the last numbers that I saw that they were about $40,000 a stall, which does not put them at that much cheaper than the $150,000 that you're going to be paying, or $200,000 that you're going to be paying to install a 350 kilowatt charger that maybe is half as many stalls, but the same power output. So like, if it really depends on how you skin that cat. Sorry, apologies to present company, but yeah, if you're looking at it as a cost per stall, Tesla has everyone beat. If you're looking at it as a cost per kilowatt output, it's pretty much on par, right? There's really not that much difference between the different networks.
And I do hear this a lot in the comments on my videos, and I just don't understand the question why me as an EV driver, I'm enthusiastic about my CPO having an economic for their interest, something to cheer about. So Tesla can put some prefab units in a cornfield and put 20 of them out there, and there's a lot of them out there, and you have to drive 10 minutes off the interstate to get to them, and there might be some trash cans, there might not be some trash cans, and that is good because they cost less. I just don't understand the logic there. I want someone to spend some money on me. I'd rather have, super expensive Ferrari style, liquid cooled DC fast chargers. I don't know if I'm going to use it all, but damn, it sure looks nice. And I want to go get a cup of coffee, and I want to use the restroom, and I want it to be right off the interstate at some prime real estate. All that costs money. And I have no problem with my CPO spending money in order to build a compelling driver focused DC fast charger. And there's talk of canopies going in at IONNA at every single location. So the cost per stall, I just don't understand that argument, why it's good that a CPO costs less for their stalls.
I mean, I could see the passing the cost on to the consumer possibly, but have we actually heard like what the costs are for Alpitronic?
It's a funny story. Someone said they cost 3 times as much as Tesla's, and Brandon Flash, who's actually an employee for Alpitronic, chimed in. He's like, "Who told you that?" So obviously the NDA between IONNA and Alpitronic is going to seal what they're actually paying for those units, but I'm pretty sure they're getting a deal. And I don't think it's 3 times as much as Tesla Superchargers. They're definitely faster and they're nicer. I don't think anyone would argue that a charger with a 5-meter cable that has liquid cooled and both NACS and CCS1, the articulating arms, the large screen, the payment options, all these things that Tesla Superchargers don't have is better. And then the different argument is, well, Tesla costs less. Don't care.
Well, yeah, I mean, that just means that Tesla can do coverage because they can crank these things out much quicker. But then, we've talked about, I think Crazy Postman had the point in the comments there somewhere along the way that, the latest Ioniq 5 will, with the native NACS J3400 port, will get up to 135 kilowatts, which is an improvement on the 97 kilowatts that I will get with my adapter eventually. But, it's still not going to be a primary choice. If you want that full power that the EGMP platform offers, and this is the same for the Silverado EV, a bunch of the other 800 volt cars, you're going to go to it doesn't matter that it's got 4 stalls or 6 stalls, you're going to go to the Electrify America, the Pilot Flying J, the IONNA, because they're at that 350, 400 kilowatt level, and they have the voltage to push the most power to your car. So maybe you would go to a supercharger for shopping or the movies or the casino, whatever it is. But on a travel trip, jumping off the highway, 20-minute stop, getting back on, that's going to be the one that's got the 300, 400 kilowatt hardware.
Yeah, and like I said, for me, it's more about making sure we're actually honestly talking about the same numbers, because right now I see a lot of mixing of different metrics, and if they don't mesh, then you're just telling the story that you want to tell. You're just telling the narrative that you want to tell. And I get Walter's point where cheaper isn't always better, right? Like it really depends on what you're looking for. And I get the notion of efficiency, right? Because if we know we have to build X number of chargers to support the need for a growing EV population, then you want to do them as efficiently as possible. But at the same time, like I said, just make sure we're using the same metric in terms of how much it's actually costing. If you care about stall count, maybe it's Tesla or ChemPower. If you care about power and throughput per stall, then maybe it is Alpitronic or some of these other higher power networks. So
I want to make sure we go north of the border here a little bit, because I'll be traveling more there again next year, and not to this area, but those interesting.
Those float ones, are you going to be pulling up? Yeah, dang.
Flow Ultra, I don't actually have the picture, but there is one up in Montpelier, Vermont, that I think is about to go live. So family and everything else willing, I'll be able to travel at some point, hopefully. But I wanted to go to the West Coast and note that BC Hydro, the utility out on British Columbia, had finished its electric highway, which is that was in October, I believe, and they had 310 fast charging stalls across 155 locations, most of which you can see on the map here. And this kind of hits that similar to the NEVI program wanting a charger every 50 miles. This is essentially every 100 miles. It's every 150 kilometers in Canadian metrics. So, fair play to them. And this is obviously a pretty remote areas in some parts of British Columbia there. But that's one of those projects that kind of goes on that, it's a utility. So we talk maybe overlap with like the Evolve New York, where New York Power Authority, we've spoken to John Markowitz before, and they kind of laid out these maps. And there's a value there to these entities that are more on the public side doing it for the public good, because they not only get the coverage potentially, but they're also making those maps, right? The whole kind of idea of the NEVI every 50 miles thing was it led every single state, I think even Florida and West Virginia, to do these studies, to put somebody in a Department of Transport somewhere looking at what do you have already. Here's the first bit. Here's where you start from, is what is out there. What kind of chargers do you have on the map? Where do you need to fill in these gaps? So every state now has that. Even if we talk about, quickly on NEVI, whether the value is there per stall, or the equipment they've used is right, or the locations they've chosen are worthwhile, it still has people now in each state that have the expertise that they can go to and say, where do we need to put chargers? If another version of this comes up, or if the private sector comes in and says, anyone that can help us out here, every state has gone through that process of putting in place a plan for at least travel chargers, and hopefully here moving into the communities and the chargers that will serve towns, metro areas, suburbs, that kind of thing. So I think, we didn't get onto Evolve New York, and I won't take too much time with it now, but I think the British Columbia kind of example there shows what can be done when you have that kind of, less self-serving approach.
And Evolve New York tends to be 4 stalls, no?
Yeah, well, I did make some numbers on them. I won't go into them too hard, but they've pretty much gone 50-50 split now. A lot of the early stations went with Shell Recharge, who we talked about, but they flipped over to EV Connect. So about 49% now are on EV Connect, which had 4 stalls, but the Electrify America, they've followed some of the pattern of going with 6 or 8 even in some cases now. So you are seeing some locations that are following that Electrify America trend of hitting 6 stalls.
And anecdotally, do you see the 4 stalls overwhelmed with queue lines and things like that?
No, but again, they've gone to areas which, although New York is slightly ahead of the EV adoption curve, unless I looked at Long Island, which I could see being overwhelmed because of the massive amount of EV adoption there. They're in areas which are, less populous, so you're not going to see them overwhelmed very much. Although the first NEVI station, or one of the first NEVI stations they put in, Kingston, New York, is on a fairly good route, and that is 4 or 5 times more checked in, at least on PlugShare, than most of the others that I look at. So they definitely have some heavily used stations, but that's only a 4 stall, and it's probably not the best advert because it's in a really weird bank parking lot. So I wouldn't trumpet that as a banner for the program, but they don't seem to be getting overloaded with 4, no. I'm sure there's lots we've missed. We haven't talked about the Rivian Adventure Network. I've got 30 comments now. I've got to catch up with. I'm going to run through those, and you guys can take your pick of whatever you've seen that we need to talk about in the last few minutes here.
Yeah, so Circle K was mentioned a few times, and I can say, as someone who's kind of close to the ground on their efforts, it seems as though, and I might be reading the tea leaves wrong, but 7-Eleven, their main competitor, was purchased earlier this year, and it feels like they lost motivation to compete. I don't know if everyone's heard, but that 7-Eleven purchase is still getting held up in final approvals. But I don't know why, but Circle K has definitely slowed down the pace. They were on a pretty feverish pace there for a while, and it might have been because Brandon Flash was kind of heading up the team or participating in the team. There was more activity going on. I don't know if his presence was having an inertia effect or not, but after he left and went to Alphatronics, the Circle K deployments have definitely slowed down, at least in my area. There's one that did recently open up in Raleigh, North Carolina, outside of the airport, but there's a lot of pips that are just not showing any dirt getting turned. There is the one NEVI site in Kentucky that did get finished, but there's a lot of pips that are on there coming soon that I don't see any activity with at all.
Yeah, and I mean, that 7-Eleven's a good call, actually, because 7Charge was one that I think somebody mentioned very early on. Eric, that's been more in your neck of the woods, from what I understand, and Texas as well. That seems to have slowed in a similar kind of manner, from what I've seen.
Yeah, and I don't even know if it's slowed as much as it is just everybody else is moving so much faster. Because we still do see pips here and there, but just no, like, Walter, you've even called this out. The pace that we're seeing from Pilot Flying J, the pace we're expecting to see from IONNA, like that pace of build out was really reserved for Tesla only prior to maybe like 2018, 2019. So maybe they're still building out. I feel the same way about the Rivian Adventure Network. It's just they're building, but they're just not building very quickly. So I haven't noticed a whole lot with the 7Charge in California either. Just a few pips here or there popping up, but yeah, it's very slow. So
okay, so Rivian Adventure Network, we didn't touch on. That's supposed to be open before the end of the year. Not certain that that's going to happen or not, but they have 6 weeks to do it. That's 89 stations across 28 states.
And just a quick survey. No one's heard anything about that actually occurring, correct?
It's all still rumors from, or not rumors even. He said that the CEO, RJ Scaringe, said that was the goal, but I have heard nothing since then. So that's, it's only really, it's sub 100, but it's still, it's nationwide to an extent, at least half the nation. You've got them in some interesting locations, which we've touched upon before, where they're kind of opening around national parks and scenic byways, drives, places that you would want to go. So it's another one that we haven't even entered into the mix because they're just kind of sitting there, but they're still expanding, putting them in occasionally here. And once they open up, that opens up another 100-odd stations at that point. So another one on the list. Didn't touch on Ford Charge, which is kind of a weird one because people don't really think about dealerships. And I know, we've talked about that in the past. Dealership charging is kind of a plan C for a lot of people if I have to. But a lot of these, as we've touched on, it's at the moment there are 150 locations, possibly more if they count the Charge Point Express Plus ones they've put in, which aren't technically on the Ford Charge network. But that's another, across the country, definitely been useful to me.
People have been loving the Ford Chargers. The reason I don't really say much about them is California has just been nothing, right? I think most of the Ford dealerships out here maybe have level 2s, and so they're not really getting in on that Ford Charge network.
Yep. And again, this kind of just speaks to the patchwork, really, right? So you'll see that flagship. If you want to go to a flagship, it's going to be where you are, Eric. It's going to be the Roves, the Harrison Street, EA, the, Baker to an extent. And then there's another one,
Harris Ranch, yeah.
Just so many kind of iconic ones, but again, these are limited. There's not very many of them. I know there's some. Walter can probably speak again to the Mercedes-Benz high power charging, which another one we haven't touched upon, just to kind of emphasize the point. We are trying to cover as many of these as possible, but there are so many projects going right now. Some of them have kind of slowed, like the Mercedes-Benz, although they have the Alpatronic, Starbucks, 100 locations.
Not slowed, opposite of slowed.
Really?
Yeah.
They're cranking again?
Yeah, so they've got Alpatronic hyperchargers in Buc'ees in Georgia, and those are the only ones we know of. It's clear that the phase 2 of the Buc'ees builds are occurring with Alpatronic hyperchargers at a number of locations yet to be determined, but they are still in full swing. I suspect the I-5 corridor is going to start to get built out pretty quickly. And
that's the Starbucks as well.
So, Starbucks, all that's happening. We're getting indication that Walmart is getting ready to press the go button because we're seeing pricing at the beta location, or the beta locations now start to increase to, I think it's 35 cents per kilowatt hour, which is off the initial. It was initially free, and then it went to, I think, 12 cents per kilowatt hour. Now it's being up to 35 cents per kilowatt hour, indicating they're getting ready to get going there as well. So many things getting ready to break loose.
Yeah. I mean, without covering them in great detail, I think we've touched upon most of them. that we would be excited about.
Yeah.
In the 1 hour 29 minutes we've been going, you have about 30 seconds to squeeze in anything else.
Well, the most important comment was Buc'ees or Pilot, Flying J.
I will have to tally those up because it seemed to be a straw poll. I would say exactly the same as Eric. What's Buc'ees?
Yeah, no
I think I drove past one not far away in Colorado, and that was about as close as I got. So unless I go to the southeast,
Yeah, if I need a charge, probably Pilot Flying J. But if I'm just cruising through and need a place to stop, then I'm going to Buc'ees. I really like their brisket sandwich. But one thing I would like to throw out is that although we have all these builds occurring, there is the original gangster in the room, which is EVgo, which has been receiving $1 billion of funds. Plus, they've got partnerships through Extend and also partnerships with General Motors. And their stock price is going up. And the number of builds that they have on their list, I see them all the time. In fact, I just saw 2 new 10-stall stations coming up that just opened up in the past week. Anyone want to guess what state they're in? Anyone?
I have no idea. What are you talking about, Walter?
My personal opinion is, although we have all this going on, we still have the original gangster of EVgo, and Electrify America as well is still building as well. So tons of stuff going on.
It's interesting to, other than the context, we've just spent more than an hour talking about DC fast charging and barely touched on Electrify America, except for state involvement.
And one thing I was actually going to mention it earlier just to add a little bit of context, but someone also called out of spec. They're doing that I-90 Surge series of videos, if you had a chance to watch it. And they're kind of illustrating one of the points that I kind of wanted to make too at one point, is that, a lot of the gaps that they're covering are these 250 to almost 300-mile gaps between charges. And that's something else that we have to look forward to in the future. If you're in a Porsche Taycan and you're stopping for 12 minutes and then driving 250 miles to the next charging station, that changes the whole dynamic of how a map or a corridor is covered. If you have chargers every 50 miles and you're able to skip 4 of them on a 12-minute charge, you're going places. So and that's the future of EVs, right? That's what we're looking toward in the next 5 to 10 years.
But what if you need a brisket sandwich?
I'm telling you, man, it is like it's like butter. It's like a stick of butter in between 2 pieces of bread. It's so good.
Okay. We've got our sponsorship in for the evening. I think we need to close it down, but I think it's all very positive stuff. I don't think we could possibly squeeze in any more networks, and this is looking good. Maybe we'll do a follow-up for what we're looking forward to in 2025 from these guys, but and we certainly need to talk level 2 again soon. But for now, thank you everyone for joining us. Sorry if we couldn't get to your comments. There's more than I could possibly track as we waffled away, but we appreciate you. Thanks for joining us, and to sign it off in the usual fashion, cheers, nerds.